Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I wanted to thank you all for joining us here today. Rafael Aquino, the co-founder and CEO of Affinity Management Services, a community association management company focused on helping community association leaders execute their vision. Excited today to really talk about a very important topic, the conversation of hurricane preparedness, specifically for our community associations. As I'm sure both managers and board members that are on today's call, you well know that, this year they're saying, like they say every year, but this year they're saying that it's going to be a very busy season. It's been pretty quiet for the beginning of it. However, we are coming into what that's known as the peak of the season. Right now, it's expected to have about 13 to 19 named storms, 6 to 10, which could be hurricanes, and 3 to 5, which could be major hurricanes. So major hurricanes being anything with a category 3 or higher. So the peak of the season typically falls within mid-August, which is why we're hosting this webinar here at the end of July to get everyone ready, get them informed, let them know what steps they need to take. And it ends around October. So the peak of the season. The season actually ends in November. So the peak is actually September 10th is when normally that's the top of the season. So we still have a good 40 days to go before that occurs. So it's important that we're all getting ready, getting the information that's necessary to make sure that we're ready and making the contacts with the right organizations to be able to help us. Because many times when we get into these kinds of situations with hurricanes, it's not something that a manager can handle by themselves. There's so many individuals that are involved, which is one of the reasons why we have a great guest and really honored to have Erin Nickerson with Unlimited Restoration. She's been a pioneer in the industry, very well known throughout South Florida. She's also the president of Community Association Institute's Gold Coast chapter. So very happy to have you on, Erin. And before I let you do a quick intro, I do want to do a little plug. We recently started a Facebook group to really help inform board members and managers. So I welcome you. Dulce will be putting it into our chat. So make sure you click on that, subscribe to our Facebook group, and we'll be providing information, providing responses, and providing information that's specific to community associations. So, Erin, thank you so much for being here today. If you don't mind saying a little bit about yourself and the experience and the amount of years that you've been doing this restoration work.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Rafael. Good morning, everyone. My name is Erin Nickerson with Unlimited Restoration. I have been in the restoration space for the last 10 years, and wow, how it's changed. How I advised 10 years ago is very different from the landscape that we are in today when it comes to fire, water, mold, and disaster preparedness. I thank you for having me for today, Rafael, and let's jump. Let's jump in.
Let's get to it. So before we get started, I did run a poll here to get an idea from our listeners today, whether you live in a condo, HOA, timeshare, or maybe it's not applicable to you and you're just here to gain some additional knowledge for hurricane preparedness. So let's start here, Erin. I know, the West Coast has been hammered pretty hard over the past few years, unfortunately. I want to talk about what proactive measures can associations take because, when one side of the state gets hit pretty hard, many times we forget. We forget what needs to get done. We get a little lackadaisical, and steps are just not taken. So tell us a little bit about what you've seen or from your industry. What proactive steps can be taken in order to prepare for hurricane season?
There's a lot you can do. So, how I plan for my communities that we partner with is we break down the hurricane into two sides. There's the operational preparedness and recovery side, and that's the physical damage that happens, and then the financial preparedness. So, you really break it down into two different sides. When it comes to the operational side of preparedness, making sure you have the right supplies is first and foremost, making sure that you have the right team in place and every single person on the team knows the role that they play. It's super important that if you're in condo, even if you're in HOA, that you have a team of people who know what their role is in the recovery side and having a backup plan for those people. So who is physically going to be responding on site after? And that becomes increasingly important if you're a portfolio managed property. Is
Mm-hmm.
the first responder the board? Is it your property manager? Do you have a maintenance full-time person? Is that person part-time? And having a backup plan for whoever that first responder is in case they experience physical damage to their own property and are unable to get there. When it comes to the financial side of pre-planning for storm, there's a couple key components that you need to have in place. The first thing is understanding your coverages when it comes to insurance, the difference between wind coverage and flood coverage. You
Mm-hmm.
also need to know your deductibles for those two coverages and how you're going to be meeting those deductibles. Do you have a line of credit? Do you have that in your operating budget? I know we're going to deep dive that a little bit more, but really emphasizing that it's two sides to planning. Operations and the financial aspect of it. How are you going to pay when you experience damages?
So those are some great points. I love the fact that you brought up the difference between like portfolio accounts and let's say an on-site account. So I want to spend a little time on that because it's important to know what the expectations are. Accounts that are portfolio are typically accounts where one manager is managing multiple properties, anywhere between maybe 5 to as many in some cases as 20. And those can be very challenging for the manager to be in different properties at different times of the day. It's impossible. So I'm glad you brought that up, because if you're a board where you're managed by a portfolio manager, you need to understand those expectations. And same goes for the managers that are on the call. If you're a portfolio manager, you need to set those expectations with your board and provide that understanding of who's going to do what and when, because it's impossible to split you into 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different pieces.
Absolutely.
And it really speaks well of having these relationships with your providers earlier on. So I know that you guys provide pre-disaster agreements. Talk to us a little bit about what that is. How does that work? Is it really a benefit for the association or for the manager?
Sure. From a restoration standpoint, if you do not have an emergency response program agreement for post-storm response, we're not going to be coming to you after the storm until we service our entire response
Mm.
program and then get to you. So it becomes increasingly important on the portfolio managed side, on the condo side, that you have these disaster agreements in place prior to a storm hitting. Part of the scope of work of that agreement should say what that initial mitigation looks like. Are we removing drywall for flood water? Is there equipment being installed? What resources are you going to need as a property post-storm that I, your restoration contractor, need to have in place in order to be the best partner for you? The second side of that in having the disaster program is pre-negotiated pricing. It's very, very important that you understand what pricing models are going to be used in your disaster recovery. Not every restoration company is created equal, and not every restoration company has standardized pricing. If you're using a contractor from Idaho to service your condominium after the storm because you didn't have a contract in place, do they know the insurance company tool for billing for Florida's pricing model? Do they use time and materials pricing that is Idaho pricing? Or maybe you have a contractor from New York City that comes in that has elevated pricing. Once you sign that work authorization for service, you're on the hook. So it becomes a cost saving and a cost measuring tool for having these pre-negotiated agreements. And I think it's important to bring up that I'm not the only agreement that you do need for post-storm response. If you're close to the ocean on barrier islands, who is taking all the sand that winds up on your property? If you have 3 foot of sand and I can't get my trucks into your property, how are we going to service you post-storm? And that makes me think, what about my inland properties, my HOAs? What about your landscaping? Do you have a contract for post-storm cleanup? Usually there's a fee associated with that, but it becomes increasingly important on how we're going to recover the property based on your property's specific needs. Especially if you are a portfolio property, this becomes increasingly important for you to make sure that you have all of the tools from your partners ready to go. So you would need landscaping, a roofing contract, if you have elevators on your property, there's addendums in your agreements if you do have service agreements as well as post-storm response timeframe. I implore you, if you have elevators, um, to check those contracts. That's one of the hardest contractors to find after a storm.
Hmm.
And make sure that you know that who your account manager is for these specific service providers. The worst thing you can do is not know who that advocate is on in managing your account. Can't get in touch with them after the storm, and you're just calling an 800 number. It's better to have these relationships before it happens.
Those are some great points, especially when it comes to the sand or debris that does occur. Because how are your trucks going to get in there if we don't have that? And really goes to speak to the importance, as you stated, which is having those relationships, having those relationships early on. And even if you don't have them now, it doesn't mean you panic. You start making the calls, and I know in my experience, many people in our industry are very helpful. They're willing to help each other out, and they're willing to share the contacts that they have as well, so that you can get whatever job is necessary. But if you're waiting till the day of the storm hits, or the day after, I should say, it's going to be very difficult. How many calls are you going to be receiving? How many calls are the vendors that you service going to be receiving? And I know you've said it in the past, and I'll say it again. It's important to have, not just one, also two. Have them lined up, and then that way, you have a backup plan as a manager, as a board, to be able to address, and then you work with who you need to work with. Because as you mentioned, you're going to get a flood of people coming in from all over, from different states. And if they don't understand your policies, they don't understand, as you said, the way it needs to be quoted for the insurance companies, it just becomes much more work for the manager, as well as for the board of directors. So I know you mentioned a little bit about before storm and after storm. So talk to me a little bit, or walk me through what your team sees after a storm hits. Let's say you're able to get your trucks in. What do you see, and how do you handle that?
So I think one of the biggest things that I want to drive home on is flood water. So flood water and flood damage is rising groundwater, and it's important to differentiate between flood versus wind damage. The water that falls out of the sky, that's wind-driven rain into your building through sliding glass windows and doors. Maybe you have deficiencies in your stucco or paint. That is covered under the wind policy. Flood policy is anything that hits the ground that rises, intercoastal water and seawater. That water, no matter what happens to your buildings, if that water comes on the inside, any porous building material must be removed and replaced, no matter what.
Hmm.
It cannot stay in the building. It's category 3, grossly contaminated. We call it black water. So you have this fund policy, part of your insurance policy, that says that you must mitigate against secondary damages. And for us, especially if you're here in South Florida, we're always trying to mitigate against mold. So you need to get that building material cut and ripped out as soon as possible. You'll hear the term 2-foot flood cut. This is the situation where that applies. So no matter what, all of that drywall and insulation, porous building materials, that could be vinyl, like flooring, wood flooring, any contents, personal contents that your unit owners would have inside of their unit that are porous, all of that needs to be discarded. If you don't do that in a timely fashion and you don't mitigate against mold occurring, you could face a denial from the insurance carrier on a potential mold claim because you didn't mitigate against the flood waters that came in. It's one of the biggest stubs that I see managers and boards make after a hurricane has passed. It's all got to come out no matter what, which is why those pre-negotiated pricing models are so important before
Right.
the storm. So you know what you're going to be paying and you don't get price gouged. Although it's illegal in the state of Florida, we see it happen a lot.
Yeah, I know what I've seen in some situations in the past, and I guess I want to talk to you about, who should do what, right? Because many times you'll get boards, well, let's just have the maintenance crew handle cutting that out. What's your experience in having them do that compared to, let's say, a restoration company?
So great question. So category three, we call it black water, is liability. If it's
Hmm.
removed incorrectly, if somebody is to get sick after because it was not cleaned correctly by a professional, I have seen unit owners sue associations on the West Coast because it is the association's financial obligation to remove that damaged material because they own the drywall, right?
Yeah,
So I have seen the lawsuit side of it happen post-storm. The other side is when you're taking on any sort of water damage cleanup and your team is not licensed or insured to do so, the association is assuming the risk, right? So that's where I don't love to see that. It really needs to be done by a restoration professional the correct way to avoid any liability or people getting sick, including your teams.
that's right. That's right. I asked that question because of that many times. And I get it. Board members are always trying to do the best for their communities. Part of that, many times they feel it's, oh, I need to save, save, save. But in reality, there's so many more factors that go into it. And I brought up the question specifically because you said of black water. That is very dangerous, can contaminate. And ultimately, they're probably just going to be focused on, okay, this is the job that I need to do. Let's tear down 2 feet or 3 feet, whatever it may be, but they're not calculating the square footage. They're not understanding everything else that needs to go into it, not just to clean up, but also to be able to provide the information that's necessary with the claim. I think where the focus
Absolutely.
should be with those team members is, providing updates, doing other things within the community that are going to be pertinent, that are removing storm drain, whatever it may be. There's other things that could be done. Let's let the professionals do what the professionals need to do. That way, we don't get in the way of potential future issues. Penny wise, pound foolish kind of concept there. And
Absolutely.
and what are some of the biggest mistakes association make, let's say after the fact, when it comes to, let's say, drying or wanting to repair? I know we have that instance that, oh, we want to fix everything now and it needs to be done in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure. I love that you brought up the documentation side of it. So that is one of the biggest mistakes that I see when I have associations that come in, rip out a bunch of drywall, and they don't have the square footages, the calculations, everything that they need to make the insurance claim happen. And flood water, your deductibles under your flood policies, and I hope that the vast majority of you have flood policies because anywhere in Florida can flood. And we saw
Hmm.
with Hurricane Ian on the West Coast, the flood water from the ocean went 5 miles inland into
Wow.
places that were not in flood zones. So it's important to know, do I have flood insurance, and to talk to your agent about that. But your flood deductibles are fairly small as compared to your wind. I average see deductibles for condominiums and HOAs anywhere from like $1,200 to $5,000 in a deductible for flood water. For us as a restoration company to come in and cut out and clean and make sure everything's documented properly to submit to your insurance carrier, our bills are a lot higher than that. It's worth it. Um, Other things that I see people do after the storm that are, it makes my heart break a little bit, is the communication after a storm with the membership is one of the most critical paths in clear communication. I believe in town hall meetings after a hurricane has happened, getting the entire community together, setting expectations. I love when we involve our attorney firms. I think that that is one of the best things that you can do as an association is bring the attorney in and say, this is what the association's responsibility is. This is what the individual unit owners are responsible for, especially in co-op and in single family homes, and setting realistic timelines of when these are going to happen. So involving your restoration partner, involving your roofer, involving the community is one of the best things that you can do, and being consistent with those town hall meetings. The more communication and the more transparent a communication, the easier the recovery process becomes.
Correct. Great point. Great point. But again, the importance of having the partners. And I can tell you, from the stories I've heard from the West Coast, especially not knowing what your coverages are early on can get you into some big trouble. One organization that I highly recommend in having your pre-agreements is also with a public adjuster. Many times they have this reputation, but if you're working with a very reputable public adjuster, you're going to find that they're going to protect you much more than what the insurance companies can. For years they've been saying, oh, well, it's all these claims that Florida has. And now when you're reading the paper, now you're starting to realize that a lot of these claims are just getting blatantly denied for no reason. So you need representation, whether it be an attorney, whether it be a public adjuster. It's very important because they'll catch you on the smallest things. The way the manager said that, oh, it was water that came in, flood water, which maybe it could have been driving rain, not necessarily. So the way you communicate with your insurance provider can either can easily deny a claim if it's not done within the terms that your agreement states. So as Erin mentioned multiple times, it's important that you have these ducks lined up early on. And if you haven't had the conversation with your agent, have it. Even if most public adjusters will look at your policy and let you know these are the holes that you have. This is what you're not covered for. Because in many instances, some policies are actually putting limits onto what can be done with regards to mold, what can be done with regards to restoration. So it's better to know now rather than finding out in the challenging time, and then all of a sudden, what happens is we get into this finger pointing process rather than being a bit more proactive.
You couldn't have said it any better than that. It's knowing your coverages is 50% of the battle and making choices in post-storm recovery. Some of the biggest things to look out for that I see that are not covered, pools. A lot of pools communities don't think it's worth the coverage, and that's something you want to talk about. How are you getting the sand out of the pool? Is your
Yeah.
equipment covered? Making sure that you have proper coverage for your mechanicals. So I think about, let's talk about a high-rise condo. Do you have coverage for all of your mechanicals on the roof? Are you properly covered for any damages that it's the rising groundwater on mechanicals on the first floor of your building? Those are the types of questions you want to ask your agents now. One coverage that we never talk enough about, Rafael, is loss assessment coverage, and
Mm,
that's on the individual unit owners' HO6 policies for
HO6.
condo and co-op. This coverage, and I am a big proponent, even if you don't have a mortgage and you live in a condominium or a co-op building, it's not a matter of if water damage is going to happen, it's when is it going to happen? Because no matter how good you take care of your unit, there's going to be another neighbor that does not take care of it like you do. So the loss assessment coverage, if the association needs to file a claim after the storm has passed, gives you access to funds within your policy to apply to a special assessment. And I think that we just don't talk about this enough. It is a
Yeah.
great tool for our individual unit owners to help get to the thresholds that they need for that assessment.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up. I can't tell you, even outside of hurricane, when a unit owner has an HO6 policy, life is so much easier. So for
Absolutely.
those that don't know, it's a policy that will cover you on your special assessment. So there are limits to it. Um, and depending what you want to pay, but it's peanuts compared to the coverage that you'll be able to obtain. Because as Erin mentioned, maybe the impact you had impact windows, but the individual above you did not have impact windows, and all of a sudden you have water coming into your unit for through whatever. These everyone thinks these floors are perfectly sealed, and that's not necessarily the case. There's holes everywhere. When it comes to where fire lines run, water is just going to go through wherever its easiest access point is. So if you don't have an HO6 policy, or if you don't know if your residents do, there was statute at one point that required it, and it required management companies to confirm that they required it. That was changed because it's just a heavy lift and shift. But again, just communicate. Again, being a good leader within your community also means communicating with your residents, just keeping them abreast of, hey, if you don't have an HO6 policy, these are the benefits. And now with AI, even though don't use it all, and it doesn't not all true, you got to double check your information. But now with AI, you can do a better job of communicating, informing your residents of what the policy is, what the potential coverages are, and or have your agent provide you a little reference letter, and that way you could send that out to your residents, and you're keeping them informed. And I can promise you that if 90 or all the residents had the HO6 policy, it's going to be easier for the public adjuster, easier for the attorney, easier for the restoration company, for everyone that's servicing your association. You're going to find that things will turn around much quicker because the money's there. The money's there and the coverage is there. So I know we talk about in all the webinars the checklist and the hurricane plans, but what are some of the things that, again, I know you've been in the industry for a while. What are some of the things that you see that are either missed or important things that must occur? And I'm going to run a poll also while you're talking to see how many people actually have a hurricane plan for their community.
Absolutely. Operationally, one of the things I see missed all the time are your windows and doors that the associations are responsible for maintaining. So
Hmm.
I think about, and I start with my condo, and then I'll move to HOA. If I think about my condo buildings and with the door to your roof, that's one of the most common places of water intrusion that I see from wind-driven rain after a hurricane. Access panels to roofs, if you're between 1 and 3 stories, making sure that those are sealed properly, and if the seal is not great, your door is not great, having a plan, maybe you have water mats or water dams around that door to direct the water or absorb the water. Going back to HOAs, if you have a clubhouse, if you have any buildings that have windows and doors, making sure the seals on the exterior of the windows are in good shape. A tuba caulk at Home Depot is inexpensive as compared to my bill for water intrusion after a hurricane has passed. And those are an ounce of prevention that will save you so much money on the back end. One of the other things, I'm going to go jump back to insurance on this one that I see a lot of communities don't have what's called ordinance and law coverage. This is one of
Mm.
my favorite coverages for post storm recovery. Ordinance and law coverage essentially is gap insurance for your property's large components that need to be upgraded to new building codes. So right now we have elevators that need to be updated to new building codes. If you have older electrical systems, including aluminum wiring in your buildings, those will need to be upgraded after water damage, hurricane issues happen to the new building codes. Knowing the codes within the city and county that you live in are increasingly important for this reason. One of the biggest expenses I see post storm, besides elevators that people have to up or communities have to upgrade to code, are their fire life safety systems to be in compliance with the latest code changes. And that is one of the largest dollar amount items that you would have to be replacing post storm, minus like a roof. So that ordinance and law, because your insurance policy only covers what this, let's say your building's 1976, it covers the 1976
Okay.
component. It doesn't cover the cost of being able to upgrade to 2025's building code and that component's cost today. And that coverage will help get you there financially. If you don't have it, talk to your agent, make sure it makes sense for your property. And there's also benefits for that for brand new buildings as well. But I highly implore everybody to talk to their agent on that coverage. It's a great thing to have.
Yeah, great points. I mean, that law and ordinance is huge, especially as you stated, 1976 building. If you have major damage, good luck trying to get things up to code. And what makes it even more challenging is obviously we've seen the inflationary impacts that we've had over the past several years. So imagine the cost of bringing things up to code with that compounded on top of it. It can become very costly, and what you'll find yourself is potentially in a situation where you may have to sell the building. I mean, we've seen it on the West Coast. There's been buildings that have had no choice, no law and ordinance, and they're in the process of selling the building just because of the potential costs, and it's too much. And here in South Florida, we know it occurs in Palm Beach a lot. Broward is more in Palm Beach than so, but you have individuals on fixed incomes. So how are you going to manage a situation where if you don't have the correct coverage, and unfortunately, then people are going to have to sell their home when they shouldn't necessarily have to sell their home. So again, it speaks to the importance of having that communication with your insurance agent, with your partner, so that you understand where you're at and take the necessary steps. In my experience, I think what I find is even though it gets preached a lot is going through your checklist, actually doing a day or two of just acting as if a storm would occur, getting your team rallied around, okay, next week on Tuesday, we're going to act as if we're in a category 3 that's coming our way. And then that way you'll learn what's works for you, what's working in your list and what's missing in your list. Many times we're focused so much on the association that, out of our good deed to help our residents, we forget of our own team, right? Do we have food? Do we have fuel? How will the team members arrive? How are we going to manage if the team member's home was destroyed and they need to take care of their family first? How are we going to manage that when we're short one or two individuals specific to the operation? So these are the different discussions that need to be had. You have buildings that are mandatory evacuation. How are you going to manage if a resident decides to stay in? Do you have the email communication coming from the attorney that says X, Y, Z of how this is going to be handled? So it's important that you go through the process, not just once, but maybe twice, and really just get the whole team involved. Many times as managers, we feel we have this big responsibility, which we do. However, get the team involved, because many times they'll think of things that you just didn't know. They're on their boots in the ground. I always say the front lines know more than what happens in the back office. So get them involved, and then just work on that list. No one's perfect. We're all doing our best to be the best. So just understand that it's part of the process. But if you're not practicing, you won't know. Oh, I need sandbags here. Like water has come in through here. We need sandbags. So just things like that will make you a much stronger manager, much stronger leader. And for those portfolio properties that if you don't have a team, get your board involved, and that's where you'll know who should be and who shouldn't be on the board, or what support you're going to get or what support you're not going to get. So that way you're not upset. Well, Mark didn't help me at all. Well, if he didn't help you in the pre-session, how do you think he's going to help you in the day of the hurricane? So you'll get to uncover a lot of things that you wouldn't uncover if you didn't practice and really go into a simulation, is what I should say. So and how far in advance would you say, Erin, should associations be reviewing and updating, let's say, these emergency plans? Like, in your experience, how far in advance should they do that? We're now in July 30th, kind of coming into busy season or peak season. What are your thoughts there?
So I start planning with my associations that are committing to me for hurricane season back in February. So
Wow.
if you're here and you don't have a plan, don't panic. We can still help you. But the sooner the better, because like you said, there's a lot of things that need to get checklisted. I believe in the drills and the checklist like you've been preaching, but there's also preparing your residents and making sure that everybody understands their role in that. I love a committee for post hurricane response, because then you have a group of people that is committing that after the storm they're prepared to help. For me, that has been especially for my portfolio properties, that has been the best thing to do. Even if it's 3 or 4 people, that doesn't allow for a single point of failure. And that really is being truly prepared, is having no way that our plan can fail. One thing we haven't spoke about is the communication after the storm. A lot of times, especially on the west coast of Florida, Hurricane Ian, there was very, very little cell phone
Mm.
service close to the beach, where we weren't able to communicate with the property manager when they were on site. Does your team have radios? T-Mobile actually has a satellite program for cell phone service that uses satellites now. There needs to be some sort of way to communicate not only with your residents, but maybe you have somebody dedicated that is going to be communicating to residents and sending those email updates, which are increasingly important for remote ownership that's not on site or people that have evacuated. We have to have a plan for that communication specifically after the storm, when we don't have internet, when we don't have cell phone reception.
Those are great points. And that's important. Again, speaks to the importance of communicating that earlier on, right? Because if
Absolutely.
residents, if let's say on the West Coast where you do have a lot of snowbirds, which you do have on this side as well, they're going to be
Mhm.
panicking. They're going to be wondering, what's the conditions of their homes, and if they don't reach anyone, that's where we fall into this whole assumption of what is or what's not going on. So those are great points that you bring up there. And speak to me a little bit about the let's talk about this vendor relationship. We've touched on it several times throughout the webinar. What kind of relationships do you have with your board members, with your managers? What makes it a strong relationship for you?
So really making sure you're using the right vendor partner is where we start, right? So when you're going to enter into a relationship with a restoration contractor specifically, you need to make sure you're vetting them. They need to be licensed, insured, and providing you a certificate of insurance, naming you as an interested party or an additional insured to start. You're then going to interview them and talk to them about what pricing model that they're going to use after the storm has passed. Exactimate pricing is the insurance company's tool for billing, but there's also other ways that can be billed, whether it's time and materials, and you want to agree upon that pricing and make sure that you're both on the same page. You also want to ask for references. If you're a condominium, mid-rise, high-rise, low-rise, whatever your property type is, ask for 3 references that they've done hurricane work with before that can talk to you about the process and that is similar to your property style, because working in a high-rise condominium building is completely different than a garden style 2-story building, and
Sure.
how we recover those are very, very different in the restoration process. And I challenge everyone on this call to do that to all of your vendors for post-storm response. You need to make sure that they also have the capacity to service you. Do they have one office? Are they a franchise? Are they bringing in troops from Montana to help assist their South Florida office? Or are they just here to do storm work? And one of the most important things that you can do if you're a condo or co-op is make sure that they understand the association responsibilities versus the individual unit owners. I see too many properties post-storm that get billed for everything in the condo building. And not all of it is the association's
Yeah.
responsibility, but you signed that work authorization and gave them carte blanche to do whatever they wanted to do in your recovery. You gave up the reins, and then there ends up being legal battles between your contractor and the community. And that's what we want to avoid at all cost.
Those are great points, especially when it comes to, who's responsible for what. Many times residents believe, well, you took down my baseboard. That's the common one in condos. You took down my baseboard. You need to put the baseboard back up and so forth. You drilled the holes. Who's going to repair those holes and so forth? And understanding what's the responsibility of the association and what's the responsibility of the homeowner. And this is kind of tying back in what you mentioned about the HO6. This is where the HO6 will play a huge role. Because if you find yourself where, most documents do say, condo association documents do say unfinished surface of the wall, that's the association's responsibility. Anything after that is the homeowner's responsibility. So, it becomes very challenging. I'll speak for my side of things, for the management side, when you're having to explain this to the residents. So if you can get ahead of it, again, speaking to that communication that we said earlier of informing your residents, like if we took down your drywall, the paintings on your wall are not covered, the kitchen cabinets are your responsibility, even if the water came in from the wall. Providing that guidance earlier on, or I should say that explanation, then will most likely sway the resident to say, you know what, it does make sense for me to get this HO6 policy. And then it'll be much easier for the public adjuster or for the attorney, whatever route you decide to take to represent you, to be able to deal with those entities rather than having the manager be in the middle of dealing with, well, this is not covered, this is covered. And as you stated, big difference from a garden style to a high rise. Imagine having to deal with 200 plus or 300 plus residents with this kind of situation on top of everything else that you're dealing with. So yeah, and so I know we've spoken about challenges. Let's kind of, me, I'm very positive. Let's get into the great
Yeah.
space. Talk to me about some of the successes that you've seen in communities where they're well prepared and where it made a difference, let's say for your team or even for the other teams that were on site.
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, my associations that are financially responsible have a much smoother recovery process. I know we briefly touched on this before, but being able to have cash on hand, cash is king in post storm recovery. You don't just
100%.
have a restoration contractor that you're going to need to pay. You're going to need to pay a landscaper and so many other ancillary things that support your community. And they're going to want deposits. They're going to want deposits to purchase materials to get you back up and running. So making sure that you have a way to pay for things, whether it's in your operating budget. My associations that have been exceptionally prepared financially have a line of credit. Opening up a line of credit with your bank prior to a storm is one of the best things that you can possibly do to have access to funds to get you back up and running. You're going to be the first community back on the block if you have funds available to start that process. Waiting on the insurance carrier is never the way to go. Never.
I know that's the hardest part for us, but that line of credit, you're on point, 100%. The associations that have a hefty reserve fund, are always going to be in a better position. And it's a game of supply and demand, right? If you have the
Absolutely.
cash, that's where the service is going to go. So it's just a reality. It's harsh to hear it, but it's just the truth, and that's what we're here to do: really educate both managers and board members. So if you don't have a line of credit, there's many banks that provide great products that are pretty simple, pretty low cost, to be able to get a line of credit, and that way you're prepared. Imagine trying to pass a special assessment to get 200 grand in the midst of a storm, when residents themselves, if you had a condo building or an HOA, are either having to are being displaced, so they have to go to a hotel. There's expenses that they're going to have. So there's so many factors that go into it. So it's much easier to have a line of credit in place. And if you don't have those reserves, and even if you do have weaker reserves, then highly recommend getting that line of credit, as Erin had mentioned. And when it comes to, let's say, uh, servicing. So let's say with those pre-disaster agreements, you've pre-negotiated your rates and so forth. There is you do file a claim with a public adjuster attorney, however the association decides to do it. How long have you seen, especially on the West Coast? I know we haven't had the experience as much here. How long have you seen, getting properties up to speed, and getting these claims paid? What's been your experience there?
Oh, not great. And I hate to be the pessimist in the situation. Average for a property that has their financials in place, that files a claim correctly, whether it's with a public adjuster or not, that has the proper mitigation paperwork that's been done, to get an initial draw, you're looking at minimum of 45 to 60 days from a carrier. That's what I average see. Hurricane Ian was a little bit more of an anomaly. It was longer than that to get initial draws, but this past storm with Helene and Milton, to get some money to start mitigation for properties, and that's not the total claim, remember, that's just what we can agree that this is going to potentially look like.
Hmm.
We call it in our industry a rough order magnitude, and your restoration company should be able to provide that to you or your public adjuster within the first few days of starting that project, of what they think that we can agree to. Because if we can agree that we think this project is going to be $2 million, and the adjuster says, well, I think it's going to be 1.7, but we can negotiate somewhere between 1.7 and 2 million, and we say, okay, 1.9 is what we think this is going to be, they'll release initial funds to help the project keep moving. But you don't want to bank on that happening. That takes more time, especially for a widespread issue like Hurricane Ian and then Helene and Milton. The longer that you wait, the the longer the money takes. Because you can always go back with, especially if you have a public adjuster, you can always go back and add supplemental facts, we'll call them, photo documentation, square footage of additional damages that are found now that you have the claim open. But you only really want to do that one time. And that's where the public adjuster's expertise comes in helping you navigate the claims process. As a property manager or a board member, this is not something that you want to be doing yourselves. You need industry experts who do this for a living to do that. And make sure that, just like your restoration partner, you're vetting your public adjusters. There's a handful out there that specialize in community association management and living. And those are the guys that you really want to be working with.
Yeah, I bring up that question specifically for that because I know, we sometimes get placed in that middle, and we're clear about it. No, that's not something that we should be doing,
Yeah,
because number one, you need to be paid, right? As a restoration company, you've put up the work, you've put up the team. You guys are at that time paying overtime. There's a lot that goes into it. So part of doing what's right is also paying the vendors that need to be paid.
absolutely.
And in many times, if you don't have the right representation, you find yourself in a very difficult situation where you have a strong relationship with a vendor, and the vendor needs to get their money. And unfortunately, if you don't have someone representing you and asking, okay, let's get an initial set of funds up front so that the vendors get paid, then how are they going to come back, and do whatever additional work that may need to be done? Remember, the first step is just getting things dried up, getting things organized, but then there's so much work that goes into it afterwards. So it's important to take care of the vendors that are servicing your association. Now, I say that because you do have, as we said earlier, some associations that have reserves and they can do what they need to do and take the necessary votes to get the vendors paid. But the reality of the situation is that many associations are just not in that financial position. It's very difficult, especially I know I see it a lot in the HOAs when we had that storm back in 18. Landscaping is not an insured item in HOAs. And I recall having some associations having, tree trimming, not tree trimming, clearing out the street expenses north of $200,000, 600 units. They had a ton of oak trees down. And that's just not a covered expense. So being well prepared and taking care of the vendors, especially in landscaping, they're going to ask for that up front. It's important that you're well aware of those situations. So before we go into the next question, I did want to say, as we're getting close to the end of the webinar, if you have any particular questions that you'd like either Erin or myself to answer, feel free to click on the top on the Q&A or maybe on the bottom. Feel free to put your questions. If it's related to today's topic, we'll go ahead and answer that. And Erin, I know outside of just the hurricane restoration items, I know that you and your firm also help associations in, preparing, like understanding where water shutoffs. Talk to me a little bit about that kind of work that you guys do. And again, because this is kind of work that's important, in my opinion, for pre-storm. Talk to me a little bit about what you do when you come into a brand new association.
Absolutely. So part of the hurricane program we have at Unlimited Restoration is also a preventative maintenance program and a preparedness program. So what we want to do as your partner is make sure we understand how your property functions at a physical level and at a communication level. So when we come in, we are going to start on your roof and go through all of your common elements and document everything that is a pre-loss condition. So the condition of your elevators, your elevator rooms, your pump rooms. We're looking at where are your valve shutoffs, where's the main for the building, the property. If you have individual stacks, are they on the floors? All of that is pertinent information for recovery. We're also going to help take a look at your hurricane program with your insurance, because you're only as good as your insurance policy allows you to be. And I think that a lot of my boards are under the misconception that insurance is just going to pay for everything. It doesn't pay for anything unless you're properly covered and that you're covered for very specific damages. There are a couple insurance carriers out there that have come back into the market on the
Hmm.
HOA side that I have seen some debris removal being covered. That is something that you want to look into if you're an HOA or if you're a large scale condominium community. One of the biggest things that I see post storm that associations take on financially is when boats and cars come and drift into your property that don't belong there. Who is financially responsible for removing
Mm,
those cars? And that's one of the coverages that we just don't think about that as much as we should. And what happened with Hurricane Ian and the ocean going 5 miles inland, I'm sure everybody has seen the the boats that landed just in communities that how did they get there?
yeah.
But it's incredible the things that we don't think about, but we have the exact examples on the West Coast that we can see it is possible that this could happen to us in South Florida. And it's been a long time since we've been hit down here
Yeah.
with a lot of people that have moved in from out of the state and that don't even know what potentially could happen. So the more we communicate, the more we educate our communities is how we excel in that post recovery process.
Wow, that's interesting. You said that. I personally have never had that experience. So that would be an interesting thing to deal with, of boats 4 miles in when they should have never been there. And
Oh,
my head just blew up because I was thinking, oh my goodness, diesel, whatever, everything else that goes into that. I can't
mhm.
imagine the costs associated with it. So again, speaks to the importance of having having those conversations with your agents and understanding what coverages should be had, and more importantly, as you stated a couple of times, is working with people that understand our industry, because this is its own little niche. It's not the same thing to cover a condo association as it is to cover a commercial property. Totally different monsters.
Absolutely.
So you want to make sure that someone that understands the intricacies of community association and the challenges that come with it, right? With dealing with so many different residents, dealing with the politics of board members, and so forth. So, as we wrap up here, it looks like we have no questions. So it seems that we did a great job educating our listeners here today. Erin, I want to wrap up with any golden nuggets that you may have, any last 2 to 3 things you'd like to tell our listeners with regards to hurricane season and also how they can reach you.
Absolutely. I think one of my biggest takeaways, looking at the last 5 years of hurricanes across the coast, if you could take one thing away, is be financially prepared. That is something that you can do now and get ahead of. It I it's the associations that don't have enough money after the storm and that aren't prepared or know their insurance coverages and what types of monies that they can get from the carriers that I see have the biggest issues. It is imperative that you have a financial preparedness plan, not just an operational plan.
Excellent. Those are great points. I do want to add to that, as we've stated multiple times throughout, is, speaking with your vendors, having a strong understanding of what's covered, what's not covered. Where are you in your list? You want to be open and honest with the vendor. If you're a smaller account, they're going to take care of you, but they're going to take care of the biggest accounts first. So just understand where you stand in the totem pole and have that open and honest conversation. I think both sides. I know I feel very respectful and say, look, this is where you're at with that association. Then you know where you stand and you know how you need to communicate to your residents as a manager. Like, look, we have XYZ Restoration Company. Our public adjuster is this person. This is who you need to contact. So get ahead of it, because again, we've been very fortunate the past few years. We haven't had a strong, Category 4 or 5 storm out here in South Florida for some time, and it's only a matter of time. So just be well prepared, and again, have those strong relationships, have those conversations. I also wanted to advise everyone again of our Facebook group that we recently launched. So make sure you subscribe to it. Dulce put it up on the chat again. If you want to reach Erin or myself, we'll go ahead and be sending an email within the next 48 hours with our contact information. This video will be up on YouTube at Managed by Affinity at YouTube, and you can share it with your board members or with your managers. We want to thank you all for taking the time. It speaks a lot to your leadership, whether you're a board member or a manager, that you're wanting to gain a little bit more of knowledge of how to be a better leader within your community. So we do want to thank you on behalf of Affinity Management. Thank you, Erin, for being here. Always a pleasure, and we look forward to doing another one soon.
Thank you so much for having me, Rafael. I appreciate y'all for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Have a good one, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.